Hello hockey fans, Oddman Rush here and welcome to a slightly congested episode of This Week in Hockey. The only show that claims to be a weekly hockey show but somehow forgets to record an episode one week less than 2 months into the series. I started a new job last week, cut me some slack, alright? In this week's episode we have once again a bunch of very interesting, exciting questions and topics to discuss, a slightly smaller sample size compared to episodes past, but to be fair I put out my call to action to you guys on a Friday night this week, and obviously Friday night's a very busy time for lots of people. It's a bit of a disaster this week, there's been a lot going on. Let's just see if we can make it to the end of this video in one piece, alright? First up, we have a question from Shane Stanton who asks, now that a quarter of this NHL season is in the books, do you have any ideas about which players or teams that underachieved last season are going to do the same thing this season? Ooh, that's a really interesting question actually, Shane, because a lot of the teams that didn't do so well last season and are still not doing very well this season, I would argue are a lot of rebuilding franchises. You've got the Montreal Canadiens, the Chicago Blackhawks, the Anaheim Ducks. There's a lot of different teams in there who are kind of either going through a rebuild or a retool of their roster. So for some of them, playoffs might be an aspiration for them, but a lot of them, I think they're just going through the motions. They're kind of in the dark days, the doldrums of a rebuilding situation. So whether they're kind of underachieving this year, I don't think is fair to say. Like teams like Montreal who started off strong but are now struggling as the season goes on. Teams like Chicago who struggled early on and they've picked up a few wins here and there, but they're still struggling despite the bright spot of Connor Bedard. They're teams that we didn't expect that much of this year. I think we can look at several teams who are underperforming this season who weren't last season. I think the Edmonton Oilers, we've talked about them in great detail over the last few weeks. They're a prime example of a team that even though they've had that coaching change with Chris Knoblauch, they're still struggling to find their rhythm. They're doing slightly better than they did under Jay Woodcroft, but still, it's a work in progress. I think the Calgary Flames could be a good example of a team that's underperforming this year compared to last season. Obviously, they got rid of Daryl Sutter. They have a new coach, a coach that the players really wanted and a change that they really pushed for. I think Jonathan Huberdeau of the Calgary Flames in particular is a player that's really received a lot of flack and a lot of criticism early this season for really struggling out of the gate. I think the last week or so, the last couple of weeks, he's started to pick up his pace. After being benched in entire periods earlier on in the season by new Flames head coach, I believe it's Ryan Husker, if I'm not mistaken. So Huberdeau could be a guy that you look at. He's a $10 million a year player on that contract with the Flames. Clearly, he didn't have the start to the season that he wanted, but it's picked up a little bit. I think one team also in the Eastern Conference that has really struggled as of late is the New Jersey Devils. Actually, they came out of the gate really strong. Jack Hughes is an absolute stud of a player. As a Rangers fan personally, I really hate watching Jack Hughes on the Devils because he's the type of player that he can just take over games immediately, and he's the type of player that any team would want leading their franchise forwards. So the fact that he's on a bitter rival of the New York Rangers isn't fun for me, but it makes for some very exciting hockey. But whether they're kind of underachieving compared to last year, I don't think so. I think the expectations were a lot lower for the Devils last year. I think they're underperforming on their new expectations because obviously they beat the Rangers in the first round. They go all the way to the conference finals, if I'm not mistaken, before being knocked out by Florida. They've got higher expectations for them this year. They had a red-hot power play to start the year. Obviously, Jack Hughes goes down for a little while. Nico Hischia's down for a little while. Their captain. So that kind of slowed things down a little bit, and they're a team that's kind of been above 500 or kind of floating around 500. But to actually answer your question, Shane, of a team that underperformed last season and roughly a quarter of the way through this season is still underperforming, I think it's got to be the Ottawa Senators, right? They seem like the prime example of a team that fits that category. They're the bottom of the Atlantic Division at the time of this recording. I believe they're a 500 team of like 8-0 in 16 games this year. It was really expected that team was going to take the next step. They've been a team that, you know, the last couple of seasons, they really needed to take that next step with the likes of Stutzler. They obviously lost Alex DeBrincat in the offseason, but they've got some good pieces on that roster, still a lot of good young players. But yeah, they're just a team that's, you know, they're 500 again. And it's kind of the Senators, the Buffalo Sabres, those two teams, they always seem to be in this position, don't they? They start off relatively strong. Everyone goes, oh, okay, now they're finally here. They finally showed up. They're finally going to get the job done, take that next step. And then just before Christmas and kind of during the month of November, it completely collapses in on itself and you go, oh, same old Senators, same old Buffalo Sabres. So yeah, I think the Buffalo Sabres and the Ottawa Senators are two prime examples of that, because they're just teams that we've been waiting for them for the past 3-5 years to finally take that next step, finally look like a playoff contender, not a legitimate championship contender, but a playoff contender, a team that can actually make it to the postseason, maybe even upset a team in the first round and have somewhat of a deep postseason run. No matter how many times they seem to shift around their roster or bring in new guys or draft really strong players, it just doesn't seem to work out for any of these teams. Whether they're cursed or anything, I have no idea. But yeah, Ottawa and Buffalo, especially Ottawa, are really struggling at the moment. So come on, Senators. We want to see you live up to your potential. But if you don't, you proved my prediction from a few weeks ago right. So good luck, Senators, I guess. It kind of looks like you need it. Next up, we have Ryu Ranger, who asks, what are your thoughts on the Los Angeles Kings playing their preseason games at the Videotron Center in Quebec City before the start of the 24-25 NHL season? Yeah, so for those of you who didn't know, a couple of weeks ago, maybe even a month ago now, it was revealed that the Boston Bruins, the LA Kings, and one other NHL team are going to play some preseason games at the Videotron Center in Quebec City. Currently, the QMJHL's Quebec Ramparts plays in the Videotron Center, but it's an NHL-sized arena, and having been to Quebec City roughly a month ago now at the time of this recording, I didn't get the chance to go to the Videotron Center to see the Ramparts play because they weren't playing at home the days that we were there, unfortunately. Otherwise, I would have been right on that, you know? But I think this whole situation is a real test that the NHL is giving to the city of Quebec to see whether an NHL franchise would be profitable for them. Once again, could they bring back the Nordiques? Could they put another NHL franchise in Quebec City? And could it actually work out this time? A lot of the controversy around this, a lot of the discussion around this has been, well, why aren't the Montreal Canadiens playing there? Surely that makes sense, right? A team that's only a couple of hours away on the road. Why not have the Habs there with an already integrated fan base within the province? Get them over to the Videotron Center, show that they can support this team. There can be Quebec fans all over the province to support this franchise. And I understand that argument. However, I think the NHL wants to know whether the team can survive without those Habs links already established. Because obviously back in the day, it was the Canadiens, the Habs, and the Nordiques. The problem was with Quebec City, or a lot of the criticisms of the Quebec Nordiques and an NHL team in Quebec is the market is too small for the area, especially when you have one of the oldest, most successful franchises just a couple of hours down the road. Obviously, the citizens in Quebec City and the people that live nearby Quebec City, of course they want an NHL franchise. They've been begging for one since the Nordiques moved to Colorado. But is that group enough to be able to sustain an NHL franchise moving forwards? That's what the NHL want to figure out. If they get several teams like the LA Kings, the Boston Bruins, who don't have any affiliation with the Quebec Nordiques at all, it's not as if they got Colorado, it's the LA Kings right on the other side of the continent. The Boston Bruins, who they're a bitter rival of the Montreal Canadiens, didn't really have the same rivalry with the Nordiques, but a team that doesn't really have a dog in the fight there. You get those two teams up there. Are many LA Kings fans and many Boston Bruins fans going to make the trip to Quebec City, or are many Quebec fans of those teams, if there are any out there, because that sounds kind of sacrilegious, right? Are either of them going to be able to make the trip there? Are they going to put the effort in to go there? Are people going to support two teams that have no dog in the fight of Quebec? Are they going to go there and actually support the team? That's what the NHL wants to know. And if the results are very positive and, you know, the arena's sold out every single game they play there, will that show the NHL that actually maybe we can reconsider Quebec City as an option for them? But I think a really interesting and pretty vital piece of information here that most people outside the province of Quebec might not know about in this whole situation is the fact that there's been a lot of money offered in order for some of these teams to go and play at the Videotron Center. There was a report released soon after the announcement was made about these preseason games, suggesting that the Montreal Canadiens had asked or even offered to go and play some of these preseason games to take part in this event free of charge. They didn't ask for any money. They didn't ask for the province of Quebec to pay them to do so, but the province or the city of Quebec, I'm not sure which one it is, I'm assuming it's the province of Quebec instead decided to pay the LA Kings, I believe, $5.5 million in order to go and play these preseason games, essentially ask them to come and play for a fee, which is not outside the realm of possibility for a business-led league and, you know, a sports league and a business. That's not the strange thing here. It's the fact that they have one of the oldest, most successful organizations on their doorstep a few hours away, and instead of using them and taking them and going, let's get the Habs fans here as well, they decided, no, let's pay $5.5 million to a team right on the other side of the continent in a completely different country and get them to do it instead. So whether this was all the NHL's decision to pick these teams, maybe take that with a pinch of salt. I'm not necessarily sure that's it. Whether the province of Quebec wanted to use that money for whatever reason, whether it's a tax incentive where they can write it off or whatever, I don't know. I'm not a financial expert by no means. But it's a little bit interesting, isn't it, that they've picked an LA team and a California Sunbelt franchise on the other side of the continent to go and play in Quebec City at the Videotron Center. No other kind of relationship, no other kind of link to Quebec City, when they had the Habs on their doorstep offering to do it for free. Even doing the Habs versus Boston, that would bring in a huge amount of people to the Videotron Center. But whether it's either the province of Quebec or the NHL itself going, we don't want any team close by that's got an affiliation with the city or an already established fan base coming in, because that could maybe skew the data somehow, or that could not give them a real accurate representation of whether Quebec City is a viable city to put another NHL franchise in. So it's an interesting proposal. I'm very interested to see how it all turns out, what the stats and the attendance figures are like, but Quebec City, you're getting some preseason games next season. That's pretty exciting, right? Now we have Hockey Dude Maddox, who asks, what do you think about the Boston Bruins doing what no one expected of them? The Boston Bruins have been a pretty fascinating team to watch so far this season, especially given the key departures that they experienced this past offseason. You had Patrice Bergeron, their number one center, their franchise forward, the captain of the roster, one of, if not the best defensive forward of his entire generation, arguably one of the best in NHL history even. He hangs up his skates after a really disappointing playoff performance following a dominant regular season where they break a bunch of different records. And not only Patrice Bergeron, you have David Krejci, their number two center, who after a year back home in the Czech Republic returns to the Boston Bruins for one last dance with this core, and unfortunately it doesn't go well for them and he also decides to hang up his skates. So the Bruins are without their first and second line centers to start this year. They have to find a way to replace two of the most integral players on their roster for the last decade plus. Somehow they've managed to get it done early on in the year, whether it's a case of they're getting the job done by committee, their off-season signings that they made in order to kind of offset some of the losses from Bergeron and Krejci. They somehow managed to do it, and they're one of the best teams in the National Hockey League again. Now, this last week or so hasn't necessarily gone the Bruins' way. They've kind of come back down to reality a little bit, but to be fair, for the first 6 weeks of the season, they were either first or second place across the entire league standings in the NHL. So having a couple of losses here or there, it's really not the end of the world for them. You've got guys like Ullmark and Swayman. Their net minding is still doing fantastic. They've pretty much picked up right where they left off last season, and they're one of, if not the best tandem in the league once again to start the year. The defensive core that I believe is relatively unchanged for the Boston Bruins this season compared to last year. They're once again getting the job done. They're known as one of the best defensive teams in the league this year. So whether it's the goaltending and the defense that's picked up a lot of the slack for the forward adjustments, but that being said, Brad Marchand is still on the roster, David Pastrnak is still on the roster, James Van Riemsdyk has rejoined the team, you've got Charlie Coyle, you've got forward depth there, and they're managing to get the job done. The Boston Bruins, apart from this last week or so, they've managed to stay one of the best teams in the NHL, so even if their forward group has kind of slacked a little bit, the defense has picked up that slack, and the goaltending has pretty much always been there to stop any pucks that get through the other groups. So I very much thought they would regress. I think a lot of other people thought that with kind of the changing of the guard, the retooling of the roster, kind of the somewhat next generation of Boston Bruins coming up and trying to find their place on the roster, you would have thought there'd be some growing pains there. Whether that happens later on in the season, we'll have to find out. But to start the year, you really haven't seen it, have you? Like I said before, they've still got Pastrnak, Marchand, Charlie McAvoy, who are players that have been there for a while, have been integral pieces of their core for the last kind of 3 to 5 years now. But they've also got a lot of young guys that have really surprised both the Bruins and the rest of the NHL by kind of shocking the team and stealing spots that weren't necessarily guaranteed to be theirs. Guys like John Beecher and Matt Poitras, they were guys that, came into training camp and they were expected to either go to the minors, go back to major juniors, but they played so well and impressed the team so much that they've decided to keep them around. And not only that, those guys are getting the job done now that the season started. They're not necessarily point-a-game superstar guys, but they're pitching in, they're offsetting a lot of the losses that the team has experienced this offseason, and once again, the Boston Bruins are somewhat of a wagon this year. So yeah, Boston Bruins, you guys have somehow managed to prove a lot of people, including myself, absolutely wrong about how we thought your season was going to start, and if you keep things up like this, you're once again going to make the playoffs, and and I think good things can happen from there, so keep it up, Boston. I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. And finally, we have Goza, who asks, what are your thoughts on the jerseys for the 2024 Winter Classic? So for those of you who haven't seen them yet, here they are on the screen right now. We have the Seattle Kraken home jersey and the Vegas Golden Knights away jersey for the 2024 Winter Classic this coming new year. And when I first saw them, I'll be perfectly honest, I thought they sucked. I thought they were absolutely awful. I was sat there wondering, what is the NHL doing? Especially given that these jerseys leaked early from several other pro athletes who had worn them to their own respective sporting games. The NHL did a really bad job there. They must have had some kind of contract in place there or some deal with the teams that wore them and the players that wore them. They forgot to announce them beforehand, so we got to see them a week before they were officially released. So nice job there, NHL. You're really doing wonderful things as always. But now that I look at them, I really want to like the Seattle jersey, especially given that they've got that kind of 1919 Seattle Metropolitans influence there with the Seattle logo and that kind of darker kind of beigey cream color there. However, I think there's just too much going on there. The colors that they've got with their own home colors and that Seattle Metropolitans color just doesn't work. It doesn't look nice. It's really upsetting. I want to like it. I want to really enjoy it with the historical influence, with that throwback, with that kind of homage to the former NHL or the former pro hockey team in Seattle, but what they've done with it just doesn't look good. I wish they'd either gone full Seattle Metropolitans, do a real throwback jersey to them, especially since it's been over 100 years since the team was in operation, so it's nice to recognize those that came before to enable you to exist now. Maybe that's just me as a history buff, you know? But at the same time, I think it's a lot better than the Vegas jersey. The Vegas jersey is as plain as it comes. It's just a white jersey. The V on there, I mean, I like the style of it. It very much goes with the kind of Vegas style, with the Vegas Golden Knights style as well. It's just a bit too plain, a bit too boring. Yes, they're the away team. They can kind of take less liberties with their jerseys, but at the same time, it's like, could we come up with something a little bit more exciting? Something fresh, something exciting, something that kind of turns that whole idea on the boring away jersey on its head. Like I said, it's Vegas, you know, they're used to subverting people's expectations, to being big in your face, to really grabbing people's attention and going for that big showtime and wow, look at us guys. And this one's kind of making me want to look away and not have any interest in it. I think it's nice, it's very presentable, it's very kind of clean, but it doesn't really do anything for me. And I think that's kind of the worst jersey you can make out there, a jersey that doesn't really make you feel anything. So it's kind of, the Seattle one frustrates me because I think they could have done better, and I think they showed glimpses of having a really solid jersey there. They just didn't follow through with it for whatever reason, and that's really frustrating. And the Vegas jersey is just bland and doesn't make me feel anything, and I could not care less about it. The lettering on the back of the Vegas jersey, from what I saw in the previews, is quite nice. I think it fits well with the V on the front, and the numbers look good, but that's not enough to save a jersey. It's very bland. I saw some Vegas fans saying that their secondary logo would have fit really well there. Why didn't they just use that? They're not the best Winter Classic jerseys by any means. I think they're probably closer to some of the worst Winter Classic jerseys we've seen in NHL history. I know some people are really big on the Seattle Kraken ones, but for me personally, I'd give it like a 5 out of 10 maybe. Like, I see the potential there, but they didn't follow through and they fell very much before the final hurdle. Whereas with the Vegas jerseys, I'd probably give them like a 1 or a 2. It just doesn't make you feel anything. It's boring, it's bland, and that's the worst thing a jersey could be. The 2024 Winter Classic, while I'm sure it will be a very fun, exciting game between two new, fresh, up-and-coming franchises, a recent Stanley Cup champion as well, I'm not really going to enjoy looking at the on-ice product too much because the jerseys really don't do it for me. If you ask me, they could have done with a bit more time on the drawing board, but I'm no artist, so maybe that's just me, okay? And on that note, I'm going to end today's video. That was the latest episode of This Week in Hockey. What do you guys think about the questions and the topics that we covered here? And what do you guys think about the answers that I provided to them? Also, do you have another question or topic that you'd like me to cover in a future episode? Do let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear what you guys have to say. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Thank you once again for sticking around and watching this video, even though I did miss last week's episode. Like I said, I started a new job last week, so that took up a lot of my time. And I actually start my studies either today or yesterday when this video goes out, depending on when I have enough time to put the whole thing together, because a couple of things have kind of started all at once, so haven't really had a huge amount of time to get a video done, but I will find time every week to get one done and answer your guys' questions and make sure you guys get the answers that you're looking for from good old Odd Man Rush. But thank you so much for the support, guys. Thank you for watching. Please feel free to like, subscribe, share, watch some of my other videos. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye. A big thank you to Bexy93, Burned Retinas, Drew Forsid, Houston NG, Raquel, and Worthless Pieces for helping support this video via Patreon. If you too want to help support the channel a little bit further and get a shout out at the end of every future video, make sure you head over to patreon.com/oddmanrush and become a patron today.